Hello everybody, welcome back to my Unimpressive Collection. It's a show where I pull records from my personal collection and I talk about them. I share my thoughts on them and what they mean to me. Today's episode we actually have a double feature. We're going to be talking about the first two albums by the Repos. One of my favorite bands. We're going to be talking about their self-titled LP, as well as their second album, Hearts and Heads Explode. If you're familiar with the Repos, you probably know that they are a Chicago band. They still exist, they still play from time to time, but they have been around since, I want to say, around 2003, maybe 2002. Those days are kind of a blur, but I remember seeing them around that time for the first time. They started out playing pretty often. They eventually, I want to say like about a year or two in, they kind of stopped playing. They would still play, but it would be very few and far between, like maybe twice a year, and Repo shows became legendary. It was something that you looked forward to all year if you were a punk or a hardcore kid in Chicago. Seeing the Repos was, I mean, I know it's not the same as, somebody in the 80s seeing the Bad Brains. You hear about that all the time. The Bad Brains were like an out-of-body experience. They were the greatest live band ever. Just unbelievable. I don't doubt that for 1 second. I love the Bad Brains. I wouldn't feel comfortable comparing whatever it was like to see the Repos to that, but it's probably the closest thing that a punk in Chicago would ever get to something like that. The Repos were the greatest live band that Chicago hardcore has maybe ever seen, at least in the time that I've been involved, since like 98 or so. I mean, that's like 20 something years. So maybe there was like the Effigies or Articles of Faith. I don't even know. I never saw those bands. They might have been incredible too. But for my era, the Repos around between 2003 and 2008, those shows were just absolutely legendary. I don't think that you'll get many people disagreeing with me on that were around then in Chicago. So when it comes to their albums, they did a few full lengths. They did a bunch of splits and 7 inches, and they had a demo tape. They had later on, when they like closer to modern times, they started doing a lot of more stuff on tape, a lot of collections, live tapes, things like that. But yeah, when the albums first came out, they were on Youth Attack. Repos records are really sought after. People pay top dollar for Repos records. They kind of always have, but I would say, if anybody doesn't have like first pressings of these, like, I could hawk these for a decent amount of money just because they're so rare. Youth Attack only pressed like 800 something of each release. They wound up re-releasing them later on, like sometime in the 2010s. I forget when, but yeah, these Repos records are very important to a lot of people. If you were around in Chicago around this time, there was not really any of that whole let's buy these records up on eBay. If you were a punk in Chicago around 2003, if you wanted a Repos record, you got your ass over to a Repos show and you picked it up from the band. It's just one of those things. Like, yeah, maybe if you're from out of town and you love the Repos and you happen to have one of these records, that's fine. But the Repos were truly a special experience for our city. And I think that most punks in town would attest to that. The Repos, when they played, it was a special experience. You waited all year for their 8-minute set to come and go. And it was like nothing else. There was just complete bursts of energy, and then it was over. You'd see Aaron practically wrapped in a straitjacket, just it was just pure unhinged rage, and then it was over. They never played for very long. The Repos live experience was special, and having these records is more than just listening to them for me. It brings back memories of going to see them in like a basement or like a warehouse, or you know, the Pulaski Park Field House. Actually, I saw them there. That was like that was their Chicago Fest show. That doesn't count. That was like a show of like 500 something people. But seeing them in a small space and picking up these records when you were able to see them, that was what the Repos experience was. If you're from out of town and you have these records because you got them on eBay or Discogs or whatever, more power to you. They're incredible records, but there's more authenticity to being a punk from Chicago and being into the Repos. So that being said, I want to get started on talking about the records. So first, Repos LP. Self-titled. It's got Michael Jackson over here, Tom Hanks over here, I'm pretty sure. I think one of these is Cameron Diaz, and maybe Nicole Kidman. I'm not sure. It's kind of hard to tell. Pretty cool artwork. I mean, it's obviously making some kind of a statement about, you know, celebrity culture or whatever. But yeah, this album, oh God, what do I say about it? It was just I don't know, it's like 10 minutes or something. 11, 12 minutes maybe. And it's just every song on it is just like a punk rock classic. It's fast, it's angry, but it's, to be honest, it's a very easy listen. You know, it's not like super noisy. It's just like stripped down 80s hardcore punk played in the 2000s by 4 dudes who were very tall. Youth Attack once described him as height requirement hardcore. It's totally true. These guys were like a foot taller than everybody else at the show. They looked like basketball players. But yeah, it's just one of those bands that just like, when they came out, their music was perfect. Their image was perfect. It just wasn't like anything that I had ever seen. There was just something about it that just like, I had to pay attention, and they were just my favorite band in the city immediately from the second I saw them. I think the first time I saw the Repos was at the Arlington Heights Knights of Columbus, and they were playing with like Punch in the Face and like a bunch of metalcore bands, because that's just kind of how shows were when the Chicago scene was kind of like, I don't know, I guess it was kind of like revitalizing itself in the early 2000s when I like first started kind of going to shows in Chicago around 2001. There wasn't really room to separate the scenes at that time. You couldn't really be like, all right, this is just punk bands that sound like Los Crudos, or this is just like metalcore that sounds like Earth Crisis. Like, I remember these bands having to play together because we're trying to get people to come out to shows. The scene wasn't very big at the time. I think we were just coming out of the 90s and something that I wasn't really around for. But I just remember shows not being a big deal, and we were trying to make that happen. So when I saw the Repos, it was with a variety of different bands, all different styles. It was like 5 or 6 bands, and the Repos played, and like they definitely sounded like incredible to me, but like obviously shittier than like the other bands that played. You know, just because it wasn't like a crammed space. It was like a big like Knights of Columbus hall. And it's just like, normally you wouldn't think that would be the environment to see a band that sounds like, you know, Jerry's Kids or like, you know, SSD or Septic Death. All these bands that remind me of the Repos kind of. It wasn't really the best environment for that, but it was still amazing. And I was so stoked. I was so stoked to see them. They really only played for like maybe 8 or 10 minutes, whereas the other bands played for probably a half hour. They definitely stood out. It was a special experience. But yeah, back to the record. First song on the self-titled Attack from All Sides starts out with basically a rip of the Bad Brains' Right Brigade. It's basically the same notes. But they kind of made their own intro out of it, which I always thought was cool and kind of ballsy. Like wow, these guys are really transparent. They don't give a fuck, you know? It is a direct ripoff of the riff. But they made it their own, and they don't mention that it's cover or anything. It's not a cover. It's just they took that riff and they made an intro out of it. It's awesome. There's a lot of classics Repo songs on this album. You got Comedy Joke Time, Voice in My Head, Go Faster, 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 Go Faster. The Kids Don't Care is probably their like top 40 hit on this. To me, The Kids Don't Care, it's one of my favorite Repo songs. You know, if you're interested, you should really, really go on YouTube and listen to this. I don't think it's on Spotify, but check it out. You know, I'm not playing clips of these records, but just trust me, it's fucking amazing. Listen to it. It'll be over before you know it. You won't waste any time if you don't like it, but that's also impossible. So, yeah, The Kids Don't Care. The breakdown at the end of The Kids Don't Care almost kind of sounds like it might have started out as a joke. Because it's just like, it's like, kids don't care, kids don't care. Like, having the kids don't care just said twice that fast, it almost sounds like they were joking when they wrote it that way. Maybe not. To me, that just sounds kind of funny. But yeah, it works. The Repos are one of those bands where, you know, if they shit in a box and handed it to me, I would give them $10 and I'd be like, dude, this is the best record that I've ever heard. It's the Repos. If you've heard the Repos, you know it's just, whatever they do is fucking amazing. But yeah, this album is just purely fast all the way through. The recording, it's raw, it's not overproduced, but it also sounds like really, really good. They recorded this, it says right here, recorded almost completely live to analog 8-track. They recorded it in spring of 2003, J.T. Weber and Joe Partica in Downers Grove, Illinois. Fun fact, J.T. Weber actually recorded my high school punk band's CD. And J.T. Weber, I think, was in Even Score, an old Chicago metalcore band that I don't think is very good. But I think Tony Victory was in it. JT's been around for a long time. He recorded the first Repos album. They might have actually recorded Hearts and Heads Explode too. But yeah, he recorded my high school band's CD, and we found out about that guy through RQ Board Shop, which was a skateboard shop in Naperville, Illinois. And yeah, JT was friends with them. He was in like a skateboard core band called Monster Trucks, and that's how we found out about that guy. And I remember being at his house, and he had a really awesome record collection. He had a bunch of like old Minor Threat original records. He had like an original DYS Brotherhood record, some SSD stuff, like a bunch of stuff that I, at the time in high school, like had never heard of. And I remember being like, what's this? And he'd be like, oh, this is that record. And I'd be like, oh, what's this? I don't know how annoyed he might have been with us, but he was actually really fucking cool. And it's kind of cool that this guy also recorded the Repo stuff. So, yeah, that's just a little fun fact there. I'm going to move on to the second Repos album. But just to wrap up the first one, I mean, the Repo self-titled is just, it's catchy. It's an easy listen. Every song is straightforward and to the point. Nothing bad to say about it. It's absolutely wonderful.